The New York winter was a relentless adversary, its icy breath funneled between the glass and steel canyons of Wall Street. A cold, persistent rain fell from a sky the color of slate, turning the sidewalks into slick, dark mirrors that reflected the hurried, fractured images of a world obsessed with gain. Luxury sedans hissed through the streets, their occupants sealed away from the biting wind and the city's raw edges. Here, ambition had a uniform, expensive overcoats, leather briefcases, and the focused, forward-leaning posture of people who never looked down. It was a landscape of immense power and profound loneliness, where the chasm between the towering skyscrapers and the cold pavement below felt impossibly wide. In this heart of global finance, human connection seemed like the scarcest commodity of all, a forgotten currency in a market that valued only numbers. Huddled in the alcove of a bank entrance, William Harrison had become a ghost in his own kingdom. The man who commanded boardrooms and moved markets was now invisible, wrapped in layers of donated, threadbare clothing that did little to ward off the damp chill seeping into his bones. For days, this had been his reality. He had watched thousands of people pass, their eyes sliding over him as if he were part of the architecture, a piece of urban decay not worth a second glance. The contempt was a physical thing, a constant, low-grade assault that chipped away at his resolve. He wasn't just playing a part, he was feeling the crushing weight of insignificance, the cold dread that his cynical experiment was proving true. In a world of transactions, a man with nothing to offer was worth nothing. As the evening deepened and the river of executives dwindled to a trickle, a different figure emerged from the service entrance of the Harrison Tower. Elena Ramirez moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who spent her life on her feet, her simple cleaner's uniform worn but immaculate. There was a weariness in her shoulders, but a resilient light in her brown eyes that the city's grayness couldn't extinguish. She paused, her gaze not sliding past the huddled shape in the doorway, but landing on it, truly seeing the man shivering there. She didn't hesitate, setting her worn canvas bag on the dry patch of ground beside her. She knelt, her movements unhurried and deliberate. The zipper made a soft sound in the quiet street as she opened her bag, revealing the simple treasures within, a thermos and a small, foil-wrapped package. She unscrewed the cap of the thermos, and the faint, welcome scent of coffee cut through the cold air. She poured the steaming liquid into the lid and held it out, along with the still warm package of food. "You look like you need this more than I do today," she said, her voice soft but clear, devoid of pity and full of a simple, profound kindness. Her smile was genuine, a small beacon in the overwhelming gloom. For William, the gesture was a seismic event. It wasn't charity, it was a connection, one human being acknowledging another. The warmth of the cup seeped into his frozen hands, a sensation so foreign and so powerful it felt like a current running through him. He looked into her eyes and, for the first time in years, he felt the sting of tears. A single hot tear escaped, tracing a clean path through the grime on his cheek. The following day, driven by a force he didn't understand, William returned to the same cold corner, still wrapped in the anonymity of his disguise. He wasn't conducting an experiment anymore. He was searching for something he had lost long ago. He waited for hours, the city's indifferent rhythm a familiar, grating soundtrack. Finally, he saw her leaving the building, and he followed at a distance as she walked to a small, windswept parquet wedged between two towering office buildings. She sat on a worn wooden bench, pulling a book from her bag. He approached her cautiously, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. He was William Harrison, a man who commanded legions, yet he felt like a supplicant approaching an oracle, terrified of her judgment and desperate for her grace. He sat on the other end of the bench, and when she looked up, he began to speak, the lies tasting like ash in his mouth. He told her his name was Will, a construction worker who had lost his job after an injury, his family long gone. He spoke of drifting, of trying to find a foothold in a world that seemed determined to keep him down. With every fabricated detail, a sharp pang of guilt pierced his conscience, but the need to preserve this fragile, authentic connection was overwhelming. Elena listened, her gaze steady and compassionate. She didn't offer pity, but practical advice, telling him about a local shelter with good meals and a job placement program. She spoke to him not as a problem to be solved, but as an equal, a man deserving of dignity and respect. Their meetings became a quiet ritual, a lifeline in the cold sea of his existence. He would wait for her break, and they would share a few precious minutes on that bench. He learned about her life in small, poignant pieces. She spoke of her mother's illness, a relentless battle against failing health and mounting medical bills. She described her 2 jobs, cleaning his offices by night and waiting tables at a small diner by day, the exhaustion a constant companion. Yet she never complained. Instead, she found joy in the simple things, the warmth of the subway car, a shared joke with a co-worker, the melody of a song that reminded her of her late husband. Her resilience was a quiet miracle, slowly dismantling the cynical fortress he had built around his heart. He found himself anticipating these moments with an intensity that eclipsed any billion-dollar deal. The conversations were the most honest he'd had in a decade. A bitter irony, given that his entire presence there was a lie. He started bringing her small, found treasures, a barely read newspaper, a perfect-looking apple he'd bought from a street vendor and scuffed up just enough to be plausible. She accepted these pathetic offerings from a king disguised as a pauper with a gratitude that humbled him. It's stories like this, of a connection so pure it can grow even in the cracks of a lie, that remind us of what truly matters. And if you believe that, subscribing helps us continue to find and share them with the world. One afternoon, the light in her eyes was dimmer than usual. She confessed that her mother had taken a turn for the worse, requiring a new, exorbitantly expensive medication. The weight of the world seemed to rest on her shoulders as she spoke of the impossible numbers, the endless cycle of work and debt. She didn't ask him for anything. She was simply sharing her burden with the only person she felt she could trust, a homeless stranger on a park bench. For William, the moment was agonizing. He possessed the power to erase her financial worries with a single, effortless command. Yet in his chosen role, he was utterly powerless. All he could offer were clumsy words of comfort, a gesture that felt profoundly inadequate and hollow. That agonizing helplessness was a turning point. He looked at her, at the quiet strength etched on her tired face, and realized with a terrifying clarity that this was no longer about his son or his cynical experiment. He was falling in love with her. He was in love with her spirit, her unwavering compassion, and the deep well of kindness she offered so freely to a world that had given her so little. The charade that had been his shield now felt like a cage, suffocating him. He knew he had to confess, to tear down the wall of deceit he had so carefully constructed. The fear of her rejection was a cold, physical thing in his gut, but it was eclipsed by the certainty that he couldn't live another day lying to the one person who had shown him the truth. The turmoil of his secret life began to bleed into his real one. At home, the silence in his sprawling penthouse apartment was deafening. His son, Sam, had become a small ghost, haunting the long, empty hallways, his grief a palpable presence in every room. William tried to bridge the chasm between them with extravagant gifts, the latest gaming consoles, expensive trips he would be too busy to take, but they were just transactional apologies for his emotional absence. He saw his own failings reflected in the boy's lonely, searching eyes. He could orchestrate a global corporate merger, but he couldn't figure out how to comfort his own child, and the failure was a constant, dull ache in his chest. "You know," Sometimes it's when you feel the most lost that you finally start searching for the right path. If you've ever felt that way, you know why subscribing to Hear More is so important. His mother-in-law, Beatrice, made the situation worse. Her frequent visits were less about comforting her grandson and more about passing judgment on William. She saw his distraction as a betrayal of her daughter's memory, his attempts at parenting as clumsy and insufficient. She would be heartbroken to see him like this, William, she would say, her voice laced with a grief that had curdled into accusation. A boy needs his father, not just his father's money. Each word was a perfectly aimed dart, striking the heart of his deepest insecurities. He felt trapped, a prisoner in a life of his own making, suffocated by his wealth, his responsibilities, and the ever-expanding weight of his lie. At Harrison Automotive, the tremors of his double life were beginning to register. His long-time business partners and board members noticed his erratic behavior, his missed meetings, his vacant stares during critical presentations. Whispers started to circulate through the sterile corridors of power. Was he sick? Was he planning to sell the company? The world he had once dominated now felt like a foreign land, its language of profit margins and market shares utterly meaningless. The crisp gleam of the boardroom table couldn't compare to the worn wood of the park bench he shared with Elena. His two worlds were hurtling toward each other on an inevitable collision course, and he knew the impact would shatter everything. The decision crystallized in his mind, sharp and clear. He had to tell her the truth. The risk of losing her was a terrifying abyss, but the certainty of losing himself if he continued the charade was a far greater threat. He planned the reveal with the meticulous precision of a business strategy, though his heart felt anything but strategic. He would meet her at their park, a neutral ground, away from the intimidating shadow of his wealth. He sent a simple, anonymous text to the number she had given him for emergencies, asking her to meet that evening. As he dressed, not in rags, but in a simple pair of jeans and a sweater, he felt a fear more profound than any market crash. He arrived at the park first, the chilly evening air doing little to cool the frantic heat in his chest. He stood near their bench, a man stripped of both his disguises, the billionaire and the beggar, feeling utterly exposed. When he saw her approaching, her familiar, steady gait a beacon in the twilight, his courage almost failed him. She saw him from a distance and her steps faltered, a look of confusion crossing her face. She was looking for Will, the homeless man, not this well-dressed stranger standing in his place. In that moment, the distance between them felt like a vast, unbridgeable canyon, carved out by his deception. As she drew closer, her eyes scanned his face, and he saw the flicker of recognition, followed by a wave of disbelief. It wasn't the realization that he was a CEO that struck her first, but that he was the man she had shared her food with, the man to whom she had bared her soul. The truth landed not as a surprise, but as a betrayal. He watched as the warmth in her eyes, the very light that had guided him out of his own darkness, was extinguished, replaced by a guarded, wounded cold. Her smile, the one that had saved him, vanished. The silence that descended between them was absolute, heavy with the full, crushing weight of his lie. He began to speak, his voice a low, unsteady thing that seemed alien in the vast, silent space of the mansion's garden. "I told myself it was an experiment," he started, the words tasting like poison and confession all at once. A cynical game to prove that everyone was transactional, that kindness had a price. I needed to find someone for my son, someone who wouldn't see dollar signs. But it was all a lie, Elena. The biggest lie was the one I told myself. He looked at her, his gaze stripped of all its former power, leaving only the raw vulnerability of a broken man. I spent years looking for something money couldn't buy. I lied to find it, but the truth is, I wasn't worthy of you. I saw your goodness and tried to own it, to solve my problems with it, and that was the cruelest transaction of all. The crisis had struck without warning, a storm breaking inside the gilded cage of his life. Sam had woken in the middle of the night with a raging fever, his small body trembling uncontrollably. Delirious and disoriented, he began to cry out, not for his father, but for the one person William could never bring back. "Mommy!" he wailed, the sound echoing through the sterile, cavernous hallways of the penthouse E, each cry a fresh stab into William's heart. He called the best pediatrician in the city, but medicine couldn't soothe a grief-stricken soul. William was utterly helpless, a king in a kingdom of one, his immense power reduced to nothing in the face of his son's profound sorrow. In that moment of absolute desperation, his pride shattered, leaving only the terrified father. He picked up his phone and called the only person who had ever shown him what true care looked like. When Elena arrived, she walked through the imposing marble foyer not with awe, but with a quiet, focused purpose that seemed to shrink the opulent surroundings into insignificance. She carried no medical bag, offered no expert advice. She simply followed William to Sam's room and sat on the edge of the bed. She dipped a cloth in a bowl of cool water and gently laid it on the boy's forehead. In a low, soothing voice, she began to tell him stories, not grand fairy tales, but simple, gentle memories of her own mother caring for her when she was ill. She spoke of warm soup, of silly songs sung to chase away fevers, of the comforting weight of a hand on a restless shoulder. William watched from the doorway, completely undone, as the storm in his son slowly subsided, replaced by a peaceful calm. Sam's frantic cries softened to whimpers, and finally, he drifted into a deep sleep, his small hand clutching tightly to hers. Her gaze never left his, but the wounded coldness he had seen in the park was beginning to thaw, replaced by a deep, searching empathy. She saw the truth of his words not as an excuse, but as the painful anatomy of his loneliness. He took a shaky breath, knowing the next words would define the rest of his life. "I'm not asking you to fix my life or to fill a space that was left behind. That would be another lie, another selfish act," he said, his voice gaining a fragile strength. "I don't want you to be a mother to my son. I want you to teach me how to be a better father, and if you'll let me, to build a new family with you. A real one, built on the truth, starting right now." He stood before her, offering not his wealth or his name, but his broken pieces, hoping she would see they could be put back together into something beautiful and whole. A single tear traced a path down her cheek, but it wasn't a tear of pain or betrayal. It was a tear of release, of a shared humanity finally breaking through the walls of deception and wealth. She didn't offer a grand declaration of forgiveness or an immediate promise of a future. Instead, she gave him something far more precious and real. She took a small step forward, closing the last bit of distance between them, and gently placed her hand on his arm. It was a simple gesture, but it held the weight of 1,000 words. It was acceptance. It was understanding. It was the beginning of a bridge across the canyon he had created. A quiet affirmation that the most valuable things in the world could never be bought, only earned, through the humbling, terrifying, and beautiful act of showing someone your true heart. The months that followed were not a whirlwind romance from a storybook, but something far more real and profound. They were built on small, deliberate acts of truth. William and Elena spent their time not in exclusive restaurants, but on park benches, in quiet diners, and walking through the city that had once been a stage for his deception. He learned the rhythm of her life, the names of her co-workers, the specific shade of her mother's favorite flowers. She, in turn, learned about the man behind the empire, his fears for his son, the crushing loneliness that had driven him to his desperate experiment. There were no grand apologies, only the steady, consistent proof of his change. He listened more than he spoke, learning that true connection wasn't about having the right answers, but about being present for the questions. Their love story was being written one honest day at a time, a quiet masterpiece of forgiveness and reconstruction. Their wedding was a reflection of this newfound truth. It took place not in a grand cathedral filled with society's elite, but in a small, sunlit room at City Hall, with only Sam and Elena's mother as witnesses. Elena's essence didn't get lost in his world, it transformed it. She inspired him to see his wealth not as a shield, but as a tool. In honor of his late wife, he established the Harrison Foundation, a massive initiative dedicated to providing housing, healthcare, and job training for vulnerable women. The first policy he enacted, however, was within his own company. He drastically increased the wages and benefits for all service and cleaning staff across his global operations, ensuring that the people who were often invisible would finally be seen, respected, and rewarded for their hard work. His power was no longer about control, but about creating dignity. The most important merger, however, happened within the walls of his own home. Guided by Elena's patient example, William learned how to be a father. He traded late-night board meetings for bedtime stories and transactional gifts for shared experiences. He and Sam started building intricate model cars together, a hobby that required patience, collaboration, and quiet conversation. During these hours, the boys' walls began to come down, replaced by a tentative trust that grew stronger each day. Elena never tried to be a replacement for the mother Sam had lost. Instead, she became a warm, steady presence who helped him and his father find their way back to each other. It's a powerful reminder that family isn't just about who we've lost, but about who helps us find ourselves again. Sharing stories like this is why we do what we do, and every subscription helps us continue that mission. 5 years later, on a bitterly cold New York night, the city's grey sky seemed a little less menacing. In a bustling downtown park, William, Elena, and a bright-eyed 13-year-old Sam moved through a crowd of people, handing out warm blankets and steaming bowls of soup from a foundation van. Sam spotted a man, huddled alone on a bench, his shoulders slumped against the wind. Without a word to his parents, the boy walked over, knelt down just as his mother once had, and held out a bowl. "You look like you could use this tonight," he said, his voice clear and kind. William watched, his heart full, as the man looked up with tears in his eyes. The gesture that had saved him had now become his son's legacy, a quiet, powerful currency of kindness being passed on, creating a warmth that no winter could ever extinguish.